slide? Can you see anything on your screens or?
Yes, we can see the slide.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, yes. So, as I said, the meeting would be more of a discussion than like the conventional. So if you can just mute a little bit for those with sounds in the background. Okay, so when it comes to research, we all know, for those who are doing masters, those who are doing undergrads, PhDs and stuff like that, that we need to do one component of our study, which is obviously writing what we do in the lab. So we have the, can you hear me?
Yes, Doc.
Okay, yeah, because I think I'm losing you a lot, and the sound is making a bit of a weird noise. Let me just do one thing.
I think you're very loud and clear, Doc.
Am
Maybe
I?
you can just very loud and clear.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that's good. So I was saying, so when we do our undergrads, masters and PhDs, we usually have two components of the studies. So one is where you do the taught side of things, especially at undergraduate and masters. And depending on where you do your PhD, if you are in Europe or much of Asia, you do much of research and you don't do any courses. But when you are in the Americas, like, Canada, the US, you have to do, the taught courses and the research side of things. So this talk is focusing more on the research side of things. So obviously you have the research topic, you are doing your best to collect the data, analyze the data, and then the final bit of everything is to write up a very concise summary of the methods, the introductions, the discussions, and the conclusions of your study. So in this particular interaction, we are going to learn much more about, the way we write in science, could be thesis or an article, and the general structure of, writing our scientific articles. So the first slide, I will talk about the outline of what we are going to cover in this discussion. So the first one is, obviously, we need to understand the importance of scientific writing and also, publishing our results. What sort of, benefits do we gain from, publishing our results? Then the second one, obviously, will be about, the writing exercise itself and a few examples of what exists in literature, and then the publication pipeline. And in the end, we want to know the different types of journals and how we go about, publishing our results in these different types of journals. And finally, we make a conclusion. So I will be stopping by, frequently to ask for any questions, or if you have any question and you feel it's an urgent question, you just stop me and ask the questions. Okay. Right. So maybe I need to put this one in. Just a moment. I think I'm losing my screen a little bit for some reason. Can you see the entire screen now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay, so we have done the outline, and so now the first point of the discussion is, why is it important to publish any sort of scientific work? So based on our experience, we know that the first thing that comes to mind when somebody speaks of scientific publications is the discovery of new products and technologies as well. And we have seen, obviously, according to our experiences, different types of discoveries. Some are groundbreaking discoveries and technologies as well. A good example is the vaccine for COVID-19. Every one of us obviously knows the devastating effects of COVID-19. And to end, the pandemic, obviously, there was obviously a need to come up with a way of, eradicating the virus. And one way, probably the best way, is the vaccine, right? So different scientists across the world were working very hard to come up with lots of different types of vaccines. But the newest vaccine, and the one that works very well, is the one we call the mRNA vaccine. So messenger RNA, for those doing biology, I think this is a very, very familiar term to you. So this vaccine is probably the newest when it comes to, handling lots of different COVID variants or mutants. Now, we are not going to delve deeper on how this vaccine works, because it's not the focus of this discussion. But what I want to say is that when we talk about scientific inventions, we look at groundbreaking technologies that change the way we treat diseases, the way we treat environmental pollution, and many others. And also the other common example of different technologies is the VAR, for those who watch football. We had problems. I think it was 2008 or so, when some goals were disallowed because of the referee could not see that the ball crossed the line or not. But now we have the VAR. It has its own problems, but the original intention was for this invention to change the way football is considered. Then the other example of why we need to publish our scientific work is to try and improve the existing technologies. A good example in the medical diagnostics is the blood glucose test. So on these tests, remember, I think the most common way to measure glucose, especially in the developing world, is by using this invasive, can you see the arrow?
The arrow.
Can you see anything?
Okay, yeah, I can see the pointer.
Yes. So the common way of measuring blood glucose is using a glucometer here, but this one is obviously very invasive, right? So
yeah,
you have to prick someone on the finger. That is very painful. So we are moving away from this to electrochemical measurements using a very, very light tool, which can just be inserted on the skin. Others can just insert, anywhere on the body. So this one is non-invasive, and we can monitor like the glucose levels in blood in real time and over a long period of time. So these results have been published, and they have changed the way we conduct medical diagnostics for glucose and many other diseases. Then the other thing is trying to advance the knowledge. So we know that, science is all about, pushing the boundaries, pushing the frontiers. Now we have, artificial intelligence. So when you go to the shop, for example, we have the self-service machines. Do we still have them in Zambia, the self-service machines?
At the moment, I think in limited stores, like well advanced stores.
Okay, so Elistas, do you use one of these self-service machines?
In Tingora, we don't have, I think even in Kita, I haven't seen them from Kubagumo or Edgar Chagomo. I haven't seen them before.
Okay, so this presents a very concrete ground for us at least to come up with inventions, right? So we have human artificial intelligence interactions where you don't need to go to the counter to pay to a shopkeeper or anyone like that. You can simply go to a machine and do the transaction right there without any sort of human interference. And then finally, one of the most important benefits of publishing our results is to avoid reinventing the wheel, and also to correct and build new theories. Here's a very good example of a theory for those who are doing material chemistry or material science. So if you go into plasmonics, we have the original theory that was discarded later on, that actually the old theory was not very reproducible, and now we have the new theories to replace this old rule, which means we need to continue refining our knowledge and publishing the scientific results to make sure that we have top-notch theories that can be reproduced over time. Now, the big question, obviously now, is what is the basis of scientific findings? So science is very structured, very, very structured indeed. But we need to know, how do we build our experimental design all the way up to the publication level? So this is what we are going to discuss in detail, I think within the next few minutes. So the basis of every study in science is a process we call the scientific method. So if you remember very well, I think when we did undergraduate courses, we emphasized a lot on the scientific method. So the scientific method is just a systematic way of, collecting data, analyzing data, and also reporting the findings. So as you can see here, it's almost like a cycle of very important events. So the first one is the purpose. So when you start your project, you've done your thought part, and now you have to do the research. The first thing that you do is to come up with the research topic. And this is very common. I get many questions from students. How do I come up with a research topic? What kind of research do I need to do? And all those types of questions. So the first thing you need to think about when designing your topic is the purpose. Why do you want to do that kind of research? It's not all about getting an A in the research project or just finishing the study. No, but you need to think beyond that. So you need to come up with this purpose, and this usually comes from observations. For example, we were talking about the AI self-service machines in shops. We don't have them in Zambia. So can you come up with one of these? These are groundbreaking kind of works that we need to be thinking about. So once you come up with the purpose, the next thing you're going to do now is to do the research, find out. So around this purpose, what is it that is lacking that you want to, fill in terms of, finding the solutions? Once you come up with, the literature review of things, you find the gap, you specify exactly what you need to do, in your research. And then after that, the next thing you're going to think about is the hypothesis. So the hypothesis is just, a research question, in other words. So you can have one or two hypotheses. A good example for those who are doing, say, heavy metal analysis, which is the commonest kind of research currently at CPU. So when you're looking at heavy metals, you identify sites, for example, in mining areas where you want to identify, say, heavy metals and their effect on, say, vegetables, plants in general, and human beings as well. So the first question you ask is that, is there really a high level of heavy metals in, say, drinking water in a mining town? That's the research question, right? You have identified. And then your hypothesis obviously is going now to be, you convince yourself that, there is no difference in terms of the quantity of heavy metals in mining towns and non-mining towns where they don't have any health effects from heavy metals. So in other words, when you're defining your hypothesis, the general rule is you need to have the null hypothesis, right? Forget about the alternative hypothesis. The most important thing is the null hypothesis. And for the null hypothesis, obviously, the first thing that comes to your mind is no difference between whatever you're looking at and what you're comparing that thing to. Okay? And once you come up with that, the next would be doing the experiment. Now you know the problem, and you have to design, your experiment in a very logical way to make sure that your results actually are answering your research questions and providing information to the hypothesis. So once you do the experiments, you analyze your data, and then you do the conclusion. So this is the general cycle of the research at whatever level one is. It could be undergraduate, master's, PhD, postdoc, professorship. This is the dogma of research. And I should mention to you that, as scientists, we need to be indoctrinated with this scientific method. In other words, it's like, a religious kind of doctrine, and we have to obey this. If you deviate from this one, then you are not going to publish your results. The results are not going to make sense. Okay, so this is our doctrine. This should always be in our minds when we think about research. Do we have any questions here before we proceed? Okay, so silence means no questions. Now, let's dig a bit deeper on the scientific writing. So one thing that we need to remember is that scientific writing is more like storytelling. Okay, so if you think about, the greatest storytellers, they structure their story in such a way that, was that a question? Okay.
I think someone was just joining the meeting.
Okay, perfect.
I was joining, I was out.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so science is all about telling a story. So this could be a presentation or publication, it's still the same thing. And we can think about the story by referring to the movies. Obviously, all of us watch different types of movies, but the central dogma of every movie, I mean a great movie, is that we have a protagonist who is maybe a starring of the movie. This starring has to encounter some sort of a complication. Okay, and then he tries to solve that complication, which is a resolution, and that's the end of the movie. So we have a starring. Okay, this starring, you know, the wife to a starring is killed by someone. Then the starring gets annoyed, finds ways of, you know, getting hold of the antagonists, kills them. That's the resolution, and the movie ends. This is exactly the same as, you know, scientific writing. As I said, the write-up in science is very structured. So we need to have a problem, right? From the scientific method that I was talking about. So you identify the problem, and then you find the context. So where does this problem fit in exactly? So you read a lot about, you know, the existing literature. And after that, you design a solution, which is the experimental design again from the scientific method. Then you make conclusion. And after you make conclusion, you obviously recommend, you know, the best way to do the kind of experiment that you have. And also the other issues arising from your experimental design. Okay, so the main questions that we ask, you know, when trying to come up with a way of writing in science is, what are you trying to solve? This is the first question and probably the most important question. So in other words, you're trying to come up with a way of explaining your problem. So this has to be very clear. It has to be in plain language, and, you know, it has to be understood by everyone. But you have different types of audiences. So you have the scientific audience, those that understand the science, and then you have the non-scientific, the non-cognoscenti kind of audience. So this one is the public, for example. You need to find ways of explaining your research depending on this audience. And the key thing about, you know, the problem statement is novelty. Is what you're doing really new? Has anyone else done this one before? What are you doing differently in your case? So again, this takes us back to the context. So you read the literature, you know what is available, you know what is missing, and that's how you come up with the problem statement. Then the next question is, obviously, what does literature say about this problem, which is the context? Okay, you can't run away from this. You must do this. You need to know what is in the literature for you, you know, to come up with a research gap. Then the other question is about, you know, how you're going to solve the problem. Now, the experimental design, right? So these questions are just building on this kind of setup, right? So the structure of the scientific writing. So we start from the problem, where we discuss the novelty of the problem, and then you go to the context, which is essentially the literature review, and then how you're going to solve the problem. And then you have to discuss all these in so much detail. And you have to be in very plain language. As I said, I'm emphasizing on this because we make so many mistakes by trying to bring in lots of different jargon. You know, the rule of the thumb is, if you're trying to explain a simple problem using jargon, as you know, reviewers, we think you are trying to, you know, play around with our mind. You're trying to hide something, right? So you have to make sure that everything is in plain language and can be followed easily. Okay, now that we know why we have to write, and also the process of doing research, we want to understand how we come up with the manuscript, right? But before we do this, obviously, we need to know how we section our manuscript. So by manuscript here, I'm talking about...
Doc, let me just ask a question. Yeah, so I think on the contextualization when it comes to literature, is there anything like a recommended number of articles that you can review in terms of getting yourself acquainted with the literature, and in terms of years, which literature do you recommend? Is it the recent past literature, or you can delve into like the 1990 something literature? Because those are a few things that I have issues on. So how much literature are you supposed to read, and is it supposed to be the recent past, and just that?
Okay, so it should be a cocktail of old, and then recent. So the idea is that you need to know the origin of the problem. Okay, so you know the origin of the problem. So once you have, say, one review article, you can start with the most recent review article in your field. And then when you read through the review article, that review article is going to have references, right? So you can go down like a cylinder, right? So from the recent findings, you pick out the most relevant references within that review, and then go down to those references, read them as well. So if they point you to some extra, important references, again, you dig those references until you reach a stage where you are very comfortable in terms of defining the origin of the problem and the research gap. So I would say you have to read as many articles as possible until you reach a stage where you can define the problem with confidence and you can contextualize, the problem in real terms.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you.
Any other question? I hope people are not sleeping, right? It looks like we are very quiet.
No, we are not sleeping though.
They're listening. They're paying attention. Yeah.
Okay, so what's any question from you? Do you have any question?
Not yet. No.
Okay. Right. So if we don't have any questions at this stage, we shall proceed.
Sure.
So, yes, I was talking about the manuscripts. So this one is more like the peer-reviewed manuscripts. Okay, I will explain what that means in a minute. So obviously, the first thing that everyone sees when they read a manuscript is the abstract. So the abstract is like, I would say the advert of an article or a manuscript. Now, here what we want to know is, so how do we write an abstract of a manuscript or an abstract of, say, a thesis or a dissertation? So obviously we need to ask ourselves a few more questions beyond these, but the key ones that I can draw your attention to are, what is your research about? Okay, so an abstract will have like 300 words. This is like half a page, okay? Considering that this abstract is very structured, we need to know what to write in, the first, say, 2 sentences, the next 2-3 sentences, until we have the 300 words of a complete abstract. So I would say the first question here, which is the research question, what are you trying to solve, comes first. So you're going to write maybe 1 or 2 sentences to describe what you are trying to solve, okay? And then the next, maybe 3 to 4 sentences, you're going to write about the experimental design. How did you do the research? So you describe what you did, how you collected the data, and everything around that. So the questions here are the why and how the research was done. Okay, and then maybe in a few sentences, it could be 4 to 5 sentences, you describe the results. So here you focus on the key results of the study. What did you find out? If you're thinking about, say, heavy metals in Usakile, what was the concentration of heavy metals? How does that concentration of heavy metals relate to, the guidelines, the standard guidelines? Is it above or is it below? In terms of statistics, is it statistically significant from, the standard measurements? So all these should be considered when you're writing the results in the abstract. And the final one is the meaning of the results. So this is one sentence, okay? So in one sentence, you describe the importance of the results, and that's an abstract. Then the next one is the introduction. So the abstract, as I said, is like a summary of the entire, manuscript or thesis. So it captures every section of the dissertation or manuscript. But when we go to the introduction, now we need to write things in much more detail. So the first thing to consider when writing the introduction is the background of the research, right? So you think about the literature review. You're not going to write an introduction without reviewing the literature. So once you know the research gap and, any sort of details around the research gap, it becomes really easy to design the background and the rationale of the research. One other key aspect of the introduction is the relevance of work. Okay, so you need to talk about what has been done in your field of research. So what is currently existing in literature. And after that, you're going now to reflect about these relevant works and come up with a highlight of the research gap. Okay, again, here I need to emphasize, we need to be, we need to come up with a standard way of presenting the research gap. And this has to be very, very clear. You have to be concise and straight to the point. Don't think about the bush. So if the problem is about, say, high concentration of heavy metals in Usakile, a good example, you need to go straight and describe this research gap and its effects as well. And then after that, you're going to relate your research gap to the present research. So again, this is another version of literature review. So for the works that have been published in the last 2-3 years, how does your research gap relate to this kind of literature? And then the final section is the overview of the findings. So here, this is very abstract, but I will give you examples in 1 minute. And then the experimental section, I think I explained, you need to explain how the research was done, list the materials and methods, talk about the sample size, talk about the analytical techniques that you use. For those in chemistry, you might want to talk about, say, atomic absorption spectrometer. If you're doing heavy metals, for example, can talk about ICP and many others like that. Then you make a summary of the data processing, which is very important. So once you measure the data from, say, a spectrometer, you get the data out of that, and then you do the processing, right? And you do the data analysis in the end. So again, these should be explained, very concisely and very clearly, how you did the processing and what the analysis, the importance of the analysis. Are there any considerations for ethics? So for those doing, say, research on animals, research on human beings and stuff like that, you might need to explain any ethical considerations. And obviously the results again. So once you get your results off the machine, you want now to report the finding. So again, this takes you back to the research question, right? So for you to have your results, you need to have the research questions very close to your heart. This is probably the most important section of, a manuscript or the dissertation. And in my case, when I'm, examining any sort of dissertation or manuscript, the first thing I go to is the results. So I will skim through the results to see the presentation. And what I look for is, obviously something like systematic presentation of the results, where you have different sections within the results. So if you have, say, 5 research questions, I would expect to see 5 sections within the results section. So this subsection should describe each and every research question. It doesn't have to be like robotic, by this, I mean, you need to find a way of connecting the findings of the research questions so that the story flows really nicely. So there shouldn't be detachments on the subsections of the results, okay? And if you want, at the beginning of the results, you can think about, reflecting on a brief introduction, right? So you have the big introduction here, and you can summarize this in maybe 4 or 5 sentences, just to remind the reader that, what I'm trying to solve is A, B, C, D, and the results are as follows, okay? And after that, if you have lots of different results, you probably want to highlight like the most important result first, okay? Don't beat about the bush, go to the most important result first. And obviously, we need to think about a way of simplifying, our communication in the results section. And one way to do this is, to use, different graphs. You can come up with figures. And I must emphasize here again that we need to think about, the authenticity of, the graphs, the figures, or everything that we come up with, okay? And these have to be neat. I have seen figures that are really pixelated, figures that are distorted, out of scale. That shows, lack of seriousness. As a researcher, you need to spend time, making very nice figures that are informative, okay? As, the common saying that, a picture speaks 1,000 words. So if you have a very nice picture, you reserve space on your results section, to describe the most pertinent results. And then again, mentioning that everything that you write in the results should be simple, use very clear language. It has to be understood. That is the main point. If no one understands what you are talking about, then there's no point of presenting your results in the first place. And then the discussion. So in the results, you write exactly what your findings are, okay? When you move to the discussions, now you begin to think about making an interpretation of your results. So what do your results mean, okay? So here again, you need to think about what has been done in previous studies. So there should be a connection between your results and what is in the literature. And apart from, making a very strict connection between your results and what exists in literature, you can also make new hypotheses. So these hypotheses are things that you think your results, explain or have shown, but you can't, write a very concrete conclusion about them. So you might say, okay, my results presents something in this line, which has never been explained in literature. And what I think, according to my level of knowledge, is A, B, C, D. Okay, that is hypothesis. That is, not conclusive, but it's something that you draw from your results that is not existing in literature at that particular moment. So again, you avoid jargon and everything. I will keep saying this. Make everything as clear as possible. And the final section is the conclusion. So the conclusion, this is again one of the attractive points in your manuscript or dissertation, where you want to showcase your research, problem or question, and the key findings, conclusions, and also the future work. Okay, so the way we write this one is, first of all, we reflect on the research question. Okay, what is the key research question of your study? So you explain that in one sentence or two sentences. And then you restate your key findings. So once you have the research questions, you restate your key findings, and then think about the bigger picture. So in terms of contribution, if you're thinking about heavy metals, for example, what is the bigger picture about heavy metals? Here you can start thinking about, the health effects of, high levels of heavy metals, for example. And finally, you need to discuss your limitations. So in other words, when you're interpreting your results, you need to stick to your, the actual result, what you can see in your samples, okay? Anything that is outside of the results should be considered a limitation, okay? So do not overinterpret your results in the first place. Instead, leave that space for limitations. I'll give a very good example. So if you're, say, assessing the levels of heavy metals in Mufulira, in Kankoyo, you discover that there is high levels of heavy metals in there. You cannot say Zambia has very high levels of heavy metals, right? Because that is a big stretch. That is just too much. You did your research in one specific point, Kankoyo. Zambia is much bigger than Kankoyo, so you cannot extrapolate your findings to Zambia. But you can say in a bigger picture that, considering that Kankoyo is a mining town in Zambia, chances are very high that other towns like, Kitwe, Sakile, and stuff like that may have, high levels of heavy metals. Okay, so something in that line. Do we have any questions on this?
Yeah.
So I think these sections are very important, and if we are not clear about this is the right time to ask questions, because this is extremely important. So
okay, maybe just for the sake of argument, what happens in an event where you are currently working on a research? Of course, you talked about novelty of a research. This is an idea which doesn't have, let's say it doesn't have literature on the ground. This is just a novelty that you have, I think, thought about, and then it doesn't have literature on the ground. How do you go about crafting your research proposal in an event that you don't have literature?
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a very good question, but it's quite rare that you won't find literature. Very, very rare. But in such situation, if it happens, I think the best way to do is to incorporate, different types of researchers within the same field.
Okay.
Yeah, just to get their points of view on the kind of research that you want to do, especially those who have lots of experience, right? They may have done a few experiments that are not published. So they can give you, the part of the reasons why there is no literature. And if at all, you have to do that research in the first place.
Okay. I think I have a few concerns on the. Let me just go back to my notes. Now, I think if there are people with questions, you can feel free to ask. It's an interaction, not more like a presentation. I think Doc is almost done with the presentation. So if you have those each questions that you want to ask, I think this is the right time. I believe all of us are doing research.
Mr. Kimblo, I have a question here.
Okay, sure.
The same question that asked the Mr. Blessings Mwansa. Like you are doing a new thing, which is a new research where there is no much literature about it. For instance, Doc there in UK, you did a research on COVID-19. And we know that COVID-19 started in 2019. It was a new disease. It is a new disease. How do you go about literature for that? Because you need to talk about those variant of viruses and others, like in terms of literature. How did you go about it?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. So if you think about the COVID-19, for example, the virus that causes the COVID-19 is new, but it's a strain of a parent virus which scientists know very well about. Okay, so the SARS-CoV-2 is simply like a sibling to, other viruses that cause flu or anything like that. If you remember very well, in the Middle East, there was also, a very similar virus like COVID-19. Okay, so there was literature related to, COVID-19 to some extent. And then what changed the game was that, scientists were working together. So those in the health sector and researchers were collaborating to try and, describe what the virus looks like. So the biologists and many others. So that was the first point. So there was no literature as much, but the way of doing science in health is quite standard, right? And considering that something related to COVID-19 already existed, that paved way, to start describing COVID-19 in a much more systematic way. And then where the diagnostics is concerned, for example, again, it's the same procedure. There's lots of information about, designing, diagnostic tools for all sorts of different diseases, even the new ones. If you think about PCR. So PCR, the polymerase chain reaction tool, which is very important in the medical field. If you think about this, it has existed in a long time. And, lots of different researchers use this machine, to diagnose different types of viruses, for example. So the only missing piece when it comes to the PCR and COVID was just a sensor for a very specific area of the RNA in the COVID virus, right? So the workflow is the same, right? So in summary, what I'm trying to say is no matter how new the research is, there is something related to that kind of research. It will be 100% new, but there is always, literature that you can use to inform, the new research on how to go about, doing the actual work with the new kind of research question.
Are there any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Mishek, for that question.
Okay, so yes?
Maybe before you continue, though, I think there's a question.
Question is,
I think there's a question from Violet.
Mm-hmm.
You can go ahead.
I think I'm having a problem where I've reached when it comes to my presentation. Is there a way of, I've seen you've highlighted that graphs are supposed to be used, figures and tables. So like when I look at the work that I've done, I think all my results have been presented in table forms. So my question is, and it looks boring like that. So my question is there a specific way for a specific research that someone is doing as they want to present the result? How can I put it? Like, if maybe you're researching on a particular research, that research, should it have come with graphs or tables, or I don't know if you're getting my question.
Yes, I get the point. So graphing and tables is, I would say, research specific. So you need to look at your results and pick the best way, to visualize those results. You can't have too many tables, like you said, that is going to be boring. So if you cannot resist having tables, you can pick the most relevant tables, right? That is what you include in the main body of the results. And then the rest will go to the appendices, for example. But you have to go beyond tables. We need to see, creativity in terms of graphing. And there are lots of free, software that you could use to, design graphs and, just graphics in general. So we have free lots to help you do this. And if you are not too sure, always ask. Okay, so ask, the data analyst or your supervisors as well, or your friends. Give them the type of results that you get and ask for, the best way to summarize the results in terms of graphing.
I think that was very clear.
Okay.
Any other question? We can take 2 more questions before the talk continues. Okay,
so we have only a few minutes to go, so I will just skim through the next slides.
Okay.
Much of the next slides are going to be a build up on, these sections of a manuscript.
Sure.
Yes, so here I don't need you to read this abstract, but it's just an example of one of the best abstracts out there in the literature. So as we said, when we are talking about an abstract, we are looking at, a fine summary of the entire manuscript or dissertation. So as I said, you need to think about, the introduction, in the first 1 or 2 sentences, as I annotated here. And then we think about a much more detailed background. So 2 to 3 sentences. And then, the problem in general terms. So you can see the structure of this. So you have the small introduction, then you have a much more detailed background, then the general problem next, and then the results. You show how you did the work, and then you explain the main finding as well. What exactly did you find out? Okay, and then finally, you put everything in the general context. What does your result mean within, the general existing literature? Okay, and then in the final sentence, you discuss the conclusion. Okay, so this has to be broad. So the conclusion is like an extrapolation, but it has to be very, very carefully done so that you don't overinterpret your result. Okay, then on the introduction side of things, again, I just want to show you a few sections in some of the papers out there. So for this type of manuscript, under the introduction, first of all, we talked about, writing the general context of the paper or dissertation, which is what the paper here is trying to show. So this section here is essentially general information. So this paper is about COVID-19 diagnostics. So it talks about the general views of COVID-19, and then it goes to describe, the current diagnostic tools for COVID-19. So molecular tests, the PCRs, the ELISA test and stuff like that. So this is quite a long section. And this is very common because you want to describe the current trends within the literature and how that relates to the problem that you are trying to solve. Okay. And then the next step is, you can think about the other techniques related to the standard methods which are currently existing. So we call these alternative methods. So this paper described some alternative tools within the COVID-19 diagnostic regimen. And then finally, we have this section which talks about the research gap. This is probably the most important part of the introduction. Okay, so this gives the reader what the researcher is trying to solve. So you have to explain the research gap very, very clearly and concisely. Okay, and yeah, so this is just a continuation of the description of the research gap. So it takes a few sentences to do this. So the introduction in general terms should be like 2 to 3 pages or 2.5 pages. Okay.
So maybe Doc, just on the crafting of the introduction and partly the abstract.
Mm-hmm.
I think this should be put on record. So how do you craft the introduction? Are you using your own English when you're writing, or you much entirely dependent on literature from somewhere that you can copy and paste? Because sometimes, yeah, I'm so much interested in how you craft the writing of the introduction and partly the abstract. Is it your own sentence construction? I think that's what I needed to get clarity on.
So I will be blunt on this one. You have to write your own sentences in your own words. So everything should be, coming from your mind. But you can't do this if you don't read the literature. So the first thing you do is go out there, read every manuscript or every dissertation out there, make a summary of, you know, the findings, how the paper is structured, and everything like that in your own words. Okay, and then you build up on you know, what others have done in your own words, right?
So is it, not to cut you short, is it wrong to have an in-text citation in the introduction?
It's not wrong. It depends on what you want to communicate. So there is a way of doing that. So if it's a quote or anything from, you know, an article with exactly the same way, you know, the words, the sentences are presented, you need to, you know, put them in, you know, commas, right? And usually you have to, they have to be italicized, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is acceptable, but it shouldn't be common occurrence, really. It should be rare.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I needed to get clarity on.
So the other way you can do this is, so when you read the papers, you can take a few sentences, like from the paper, good sentences, and then you paraphrase that.
Okay.
Okay, you can paraphrase that to make sure that you know, you personalize your, you know, the statement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that was clear.
I saw a hand from the listeners.
Yes, Doc. I just want to find out, is there a minimum number of pages that a research paper or a thesis is supposed to have?
That's a very good question. So for manuscripts, I think it depends on the kind of journal, but on average, it should be 2.5 pages. It shouldn't go beyond that. Because the total number of pages, ideally, shouldn't be more than 20. Only like in exceptional cases, like in organic chemistry, where people have, you know, lots of formulae, you know, lots of
Structures.
reaction schemes and stuff like that. Yeah, then it can go, you know, much more, can be much more than 20 pages. But for a descriptive study like analytical chemistry, I think the target should be 20 or below. Then for the thesis, it's a different thing, because a paper is a very, very summarized presentation of the facts. But in a dissertation, you want to be as broad as possible. So I think each institution has like a prescribed number of pages within the introduction, the results, and the overall dissertation. I think it shouldn't go beyond something like 60 for a master's degree. Then for undergraduates, I think it should be around 40. Then for a PhD, it should be around, you know, I would say between 200 and 300 pages.
Okay.
That's the entire document. So for CBU, you know, when I'm marking the dissertations, the first thing I look at is the length of the dissertation. If it's something beyond 60 pages, then the writer has to convince me that I have to sit down and read 90 pages of the dissertation, right? I have to be 100% sure about that. If you go 100 pages, yeah, that is not great, unless you have something interesting to talk about.
Any other question from the audience? Yes. I think we should be winding up.
Yeah. So yeah, in summary, I have like just 4 or 5 minutes to go. So the introduction is simply a reflection of what's in the literature. So you have to start from the general description of the literature, and then it goes down and becomes more focused to the actual problem that you want to solve. And then you end your introduction with the problem statement, or a research statement, in other words. So you need to explain exactly what you want to solve within the context of the existing literature. And yeah, so in terms of the experimental sections, I think I've explained a lot about this, but the only thing I want to mention here is that we need to be aware of the confounding factors. So when you're designing your experiment, think about the other variables that can influence the finding of your research. Okay, a good example is when someone is doing photosynthesis, someone wants to know if there's a relationship between the rate of photosynthesis and the intensity of light. So as someone is doing this experiment, they're also having a barbecue on the side of the experiment. It's not knowing that the heat that is coming from the barbecue here is also affecting, the rate of photosynthesis. So when you make a conclusion about the relationship, this is definitely a confounding factor, which you don't, put in place before designing your experiment. This is just one example where the results are making sense, but they are actually wrong. They are not entirely correct because of such kind of a confounding factor. Then the other example is where you are doing, say, medical research. You want to know, the levels of blood glucose in two types of populations. You have the patient cohort, and then you have your negative control. But when you look at the average age here, for the patient control, you have 72. For the negative controls, you have 23. Okay? So there's a huge difference in terms of age. So the findings here are going to be influenced by, this age difference. And your results are not going to be legitimate if you don't describe why you picked, a population with this age and negative controls. So just to summarize here, what I'm trying to say is that, first of all, when you're designing your experiment, you need to have the controls on your side, and then the treatment data. So in other words, you need to have, both the independent and dependent variables. You need to define them in a way that is easy to understand, and make sure that your references and your treatment data have the same properties, okay? So that you have, a very legitimate conclusion. And then on this one, I think I won't say much because I have explained a lot about how to craft the discussion. And I'm going to give you these slides so that you go through these in your own time. So in the conclusion section of the dissertation, this is again very important, and you need to differentiate between the discussion and conclusion. So essentially, when you are concluding your manuscript, your dissertation, you begin by, first of all, talking about your research questions, which is your hypothesis. And then, as I said previously, the previous slide, you need to describe the most important results of your research, and then think about the limitations and the significance of the research as you talk about the future direction as well. Okay, so in summary, what we need to do when we are looking at the paper is to describe your research first. So you have your introduction, your literature review, the design of the research, the methodology, the results, discussions, and conclusions. Okay, I don't expect many questions here. And I will skip this slide so that we go to the publication pipeline very quickly. Because someone was asking, how do we publish the results? Okay. So here we have a series of, checkpoints for the results. When you write your dissertation and you want to publish it, you send it to the journal, right? So if the results are not good, your manuscript is going to be rejected. And at this point, we say it's desk rejected because there is no novelty in your results. And then there's a peer review system. Again, after peer review system, there could be a reject. If the paper is not rejected, you do a revision, so the peer reviewers who are like your fellow specialists in the same field are going to, review your article. And if they feel like there is something missing, something that needs to be included or something that needs changing, they will say this at this particular time. And you have to work on these changes. Once you do all the changes, if you don't do them properly, your manuscript can be rejected. But if you do them properly, then a manuscript is going to be accepted for publication. And once the results are published, you feel very relieved. So you are like, okay, I can now have a sigh of relief. Okay, because you've put in so much work. Okay, and then here I won't say much. So in the final slide, second from the final slide, I want to mention that when you are writing a manuscript or dissertation, you need to stay focused. Okay, so avoid any sort of multitasking. Okay, you need to make sure that you focus. And the good illustration for this is this picture. Right? So
yeah, this one. Yeah. Stay focused.
So if you are writing a manuscript as an author, you need to pay attention to the manuscript you're writing. Okay, so any new idea that comes on the way, you need to find a way of avoiding looking at the new idea.
Strategizing.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, make sure you stay focused. Okay, because if you keep multitasking, trying to do many other things, thinking about new ideas, your manuscript is not going to be prepared in an appropriate time frame. So be very careful. So in conclusion, we need to think about science as being a very fun way of presenting your results, and also a fun way of trying to solve very important questions within, say, the mining industry, within the health system, and many others. And we need to be cognizant of the fact that good research takes time. So you cannot start your research today and you have the results tomorrow. That is not possible. So take time, to enjoy the research process, learn the skills. This is the most important thing. Of course, publications are good, but focus on the process of acquiring the skills, okay? So if you do a research in, say, scanning electron microscopy, make sure you understand SEM very, very well so that, you have the right skills you can apply at any time. Yes, focus on developing the skills. This is very important, much more important than writing the thesis. Okay, but then again, you need to think about your planning. Yes, so you can have a very smooth plan. So you say, okay, I'm going to design my experiments, collect the data, do the data analysis, and then present the findings of the work. But in actual sense, the reality is that the plan doesn't go as smoothly as everyone thinks, right? It has, twists and turns, and you have to make sure that you have the right time frame, to plan for all these. And then finally, science is for winners. This is very important. Winners in a sense that if you are designing methods to solve diagnostic problems, you're going to save the world at some point. If you're designing experiments to change the way we extract minerals from our mining industry, this is going to change the world as well. So yes, we need to be winners, and we need the world to join us in this winning strategy. Okay, so this should be the end of the presentation. This has to be, a discussion in the first place, but we've done. We've gone overboard in terms of timing. So you can send these slides to anyone who wants them, and you can go through in your own time. And if you have any questions, let me know.